to demolish these notions of representation. Amount of units per acre, that's the recipe of density. I'm suggesting, after my work in neighborhoods in San Diego at the border, that density could be measured differently as an amount of social exchanges per acre, as an amount of socioeconomic, in fact, from the ground up exchanges per acre. What image would that generate in our mind and for the institutions? This also suggests the challenging of our very reductive notions of ownership, primarily in California, where you can see that the mortgage crisis and the whole economic downturn began as banks were giving loans to people who could not repay them. And in a sense, that suggests a return to the question of ownership and of property. And that is a piece that I also did for the Museum of Modern Art called the McMansion Retrofitted, which is this large, ubiquitous house all over Southern California. And I put it as a kind of archi-zoom non-stop city, but this is non-stop sprawl because it's going to continue everywhere, suggesting that the future of Southern California, or probably the future everywhere, depends on the pixelation of the large with the small. And the piece was accompanied by an animation that suggested how this larger, oil-hungry, selfish urbanization of large property would have to be pixelated by a variety of conditions of ownership and so on, transforming, of course, the McMansion into a city. And, of course, in so doing, the challenging of our very reductive, equally, notions of sustainability. In the capital of selfish urbanization, which is California, emblematically represented by this Hummer, which in fact has been now is owned by China, I guess following the story as it should, we continue to conceive of green architecture, as it has been pointed out, as this way of camouflaging this selfish urbanization unquestionably, wrapping these monsters with technologies and so on that really do not advance our idea of social sustainability or economic sustainability. And finally, the redefining of housing is important here, again, as we need to continue open up the discussion about the need to triangulate between issues of density in a more intelligent way as they relate to social and ecological networks. I think, if anything, in Anyang, what you're doing is really amazing to recuperate these creeks, but that should be an amazing opportunity to rethink social and economic project at the basis of the neighborhood. And then finally, but I guess I don't have time to, I don't have time to, just quickly to finish. It's been important to me in terms of challenging housing in the way we understand it, to understand what is behind our paradigms, our cliches, let's say, in terms of development. The city continues to be thought of development as dependent only on the power of economic capital. The value of economy is the seed of development for the city, for developers and governments. And for a private developer, maybe I shouldn't go there because I don't have time. I just jump quickly. On the other end is the power of social capital. And this is what has been ignored in many environments, particularly in California. And that idea that cultural and social value, as has been pointed out, can be also an engine for a new type of economy. So the idea of entrepreneurial, the kind of willingness to participate in many of these neighborhoods, which is very much alive here in the ethics of work and of participation, could be a device to rethink housing. So it's not just housing as shelter or units, but housing as a social engine, as an economic engine. And in the middle, architects and artists, this is what I've been trying to understand, facilitating and translating some of these dynamics across institutions and agencies. Much of my work in San Diego at the border has really depended on understanding the neighborhood as a site of experimentation, as a site of investigation where new economies, new markets, new social and cultural configurations and relationships can be constructed. The idea that NGOs can become informal city halls, negotiating policy and economy between government and those communities. Density is complexity, as this lady told me, as my Korean colleague yesterday suggested. And the idea that the social service entrepreneurial type of efforts of an entity in a neighborhood can become a way of redevelopment, for redevelopment in an alternative way beyond the recipes of this top-down economic power that has really produced this homogenization, I think, is part of the project. And finally, the issue here is that when I arrived to this neighborhood 7 years ago, the head of this nonprofit organization told me, I want you to design 2 affordable housing projects. But before you put pencil to paper, she said, we are going to design together a micro policy and a possible economic system at the scale of the neighborhood. That was a revelation for me, to think that as a designer, besides designing buildings, I could be collaborating in designing political and economic process. That was an interesting possibility. So we presented to the municipality of San Diego a model by which a nonprofit inside the neighborhood could become enabled and empowered to produce this project of new policy and new economy. So the idea was that the nonprofit became a think tank that would document all the illegal houses that were built in the last 30, 40 years, putting them in the map so that the municipality then can legitimize those extra units that remain invisible to their eyes, and then the nonprofit would become empowered to give information to a property owner that wants to participate in becoming a micro-developer, because the power of sweat equity is there. I mean, people can participate in becoming a part of the economic benefit, let's say, of this. And finally, the idea that a nonprofit could distribute the scale of large construction loans by taking liability and distributing them into smaller microcredits across the neighborhood. So the idea of designing collaboration to produce a micro-scale urbanization or urbanism at the scale of the neighborhood is very important here. Because regardless of, again, the US and its horizontal sprawl, and here its vertical sprawl, both systems are ignoring the socio-political dimension of the ground. And it's ecological value, of course, as well, but the potential that can be opened up in producing new configurations of housing is important. And finally, the projects were emerging from the understanding that units of housing couldn't exist on their own. They needed to be plugged with socio-economic, cultural, pedagogical support systems. And there is no time to explain the projects. These 2 small projects in this neighborhood, but let me just tell you that I'm interested in the translation from this into a physical practice, of course, a spatial practice, and the idea that these large parcels can be subdivided as the one in this project, where we began to understand how a parcel, a small parcel, can become a micro-social system. The parcel contains an old church that we are renovating, and so the whole parcel that usually is just a house on top of an empty parcel, here the whole area became the site for supporting the informal economies and some of the social programming that the nonprofit injects into the housing, as the case of Row House project in Houston. So these micro-infrastructures at the scale of small parcels to support informal economics and the kind of socio-economic, also and programmatic project of the nonprofit is an important issue. So these units are basically threaded through this system of empty spaces, spaces or infrastructure